I'm Alfredo with May 1st People Inc. and we're talking about Marxism. I promise we'll talk about value. Oh my God. If there was ever a nightmare that I experienced in learning and studying Marxism, it was the one I experienced around the study of value. And it's kind of embarrassing when I look back on it, but I just say this so that I want to make sure that you understand, I feel your pain as you try to understand this concept. And it might be a lot easier if someone better than me was explaining it, but here we are, you and I. And you asked why, and I answered value. In 1971, I was in a study group with a guy named Arthur Felberbaum. Arthur was the founder of an organization called the New York Marxist School. And the New York Marxist School later on took a second name, the Brecht Forum. And we were studying the work of a Belgian Marxist, great Belgian Marxist named Ernest Mandel. It's a 2-volume work called Marxist Economic Theory. And it all went very, very well. I mean, we went through, and I thought it was great. You know, we were in this study group, and there was a meeting in West 4th Street, in Greenwich Village. Arthur had a small apartment there. So we're doing this, and we get to the section on commodities and value. It's an important section in capitalism, Arthur tells us. Commodities are the goods and services that are produced, bought, and sold in capitalist society and other pre-capitalist societies to amass wealth and to serve people. So far, so good. No problem. I understood that completely. They have two kinds of value. One is the use value, and the use value is how useful it is. So that the use value of a commodity is part of the reason that the commodity fails or succeeds in its circulation and being bought and sold. Just think about something. You go to the bicycle store and somebody has a bicycle, one wheel's going one way and the other's going the other way, or the sideways. Front and sideways. Unless you want to spend your life riding in a circle, that bicycle doesn't have the use value that you need, and therefore you're going to not buy it, and it's going to die as a commodity. It's not going to succeed as a commodity. In order to succeed as a commodity must have verifiable use value. So that's one kind of value. I understood that. There's another kind of value called exchange value. And exchange value is the value of the exchange of the commodity when it is bought and sold. And here's where I got all tripped up. Because Arthur and Ernest Mandel start talking about some labor. Labor value this and blah, blah, blah. I said, I do not understand why white people got to complicate everything, man. It's really simple. The worker makes a product. The capitalist pays the worker for the product. The capitalist sells the product back to the worker and makes a profit. That's what produces wealth. Why you got to have all this kerfuffle, stupidity of it? Value this and labor that? Arthur used to go bonkers when I would do that. Say, no, man. I can hear his voice right now. You got to abstract. And I understood this value concept, this labor concept. I understood all of this. But what I didn't see is, right, why? Or, so, I didn't see why any of this was really necessary. You can understand capitalism without dealing with labor and labor value and all of this. And I didn't get it till about 8 years later. 8 years it took me to finally get it when I began the study of capital myself in another study group. And I had a light bulb moment. And I felt so stupid. And Karl Marx came out of the grave to pat me on the back and comfort me. In the introduction to the first chapter of Capital, he says, I'm going to start, and I have to start, with a discussion of commodities, labor, and value. And it's going to be very difficult for you to understand. Very difficult for people to understand. Economics is a science. And scientifically, we need to study not only what is obvious, but what lurks beneath. The systems that run this particular, whatever you're looking at, in this case, an economy. The reality of the economy that very often is masked by what is perceived. In other sciences, we do this with microscopes and other laboratory equipment. Economics doesn't have any of that. So, of necessity, we must rely on abstraction. He said, I've tried to popularize the rest of the book by talking about, giving statistics, and he does. In fact, the great French Marxist Louis Althusser said that to read Capital, the best way to do that is to not read chapter 1. Start from chapter 2, read the rest of the book, and then go back to chapter 1, and you'll understand it. In other words, get all the explanations and the examples in first, and then you'll understand the theory. We can't do that, obviously. So we're going to have to stick with Alfredo doing doing an explanation of what value is all about. Why do we abstract? What is the point? Isn't it easier to look at this practically? It isn't easier to look at it practically and concretely through price and all the rest of this, because that's not what happens. It is not that the abstraction's another way of looking at the price relationships. It's that the abstraction is dealing with something completely different. For the first time in human history, under capitalism, the only commodity the worker has is the worker's own labor. And that is the principal commodity of capitalism. Labor is the principal commodity. And the worker sells that commodity to the capitalist. Relax. Stop asking so. Stop asking why. I'll get to that in a second. I'll get to the so's in a second. Let's continue going on. Let's understand this a little better. Because you see, up to now, up to the period of capitalism, what the worker did was sell the product of his or her labor to the owner, or give up that product if they're a slave to the owner. There was an exchange of the product, the commodity itself. But in capitalism, what is exchanged is the labor, independent of what the labor is producing. What it produces at this point is of no relevance. As far as Marxism is concerned, capitalism works exchanging and exploiting the labor of the worker, the principal commodity and the only commodity that the worker has. How they do this and how this happens can best be understood by concretizing it, coming close to popularizing it, although I don't want to really popularize. I can hear Arthur screaming from the grave. He passed away some time ago. But he would be screaming at me if I tried to popularize at this point. Let's concretize a little bit, though. We can do that. We can do that. Capitalism is treating the labor not of only one worker, but of the entire working class. That's how it assumes and measures things, of the entire working class. And it understands that in order to compensate that commodity, it's got to measure it. You buy some meat at the store, they weigh it. Everything is measured in order to be bought and sold. That is the case with labor. Because this is the first time in human history that labor is a commodity, they must develop new ways of measuring that labor. Before, you would work whenever you could, you'd make your product, and your entire compensation would be based on that product. No longer. Now you work all the time. Whether the sun is shining, no matter what, day or night, whether it's cold or warm, independent of the conditions in which you're living, you must work. And you work for a specific amount of time, and that time is measured. It's called strict labor time accounting. The entire working class, you can't work 24 hours, obviously, but capitalist class tries to get as much work in terms of time out of the working class as it can. The entirety of the work done during a particular work period, let's say 12 hours or 10 hours, the entirety of that labor has a value. It's called productive labor value, or the value of labor production, right? You're producing all this time. Hang on, wait a minute. Don't start talking to me about the commodities yet. Relax. Listen, here's an exercise. Don't think about commodities for a second. Make believe that none of this you make believe you're not living in any of this, because that's the way you got to abstract. All of that is called the productive labor. Now, there's a fraction of that. Right? That is what the capitalist compensates the worker for that labor. The value of that labor, which is called recognized labor value, is the amount of compensation required to get the worker to come back to work the next day. That, of course, fluctuates. I know, you're going to say, let's not jump the gun. Yeah, it is based on the struggle that goes on, but let's not get there yet. Let's just hold our horses for a second and stop asking so. I'll hold up my hand when you can ask the questions why and so. For now, we have this extended production labor and this recognized labor value. So they're compensating the recognized labor value. The difference between productive labor value and compensated labor value, this difference, right, is called surplus value. And that's what capitalism exploits and accumulates from the working class. The essential drive of capitalism is the accumulation of that surplus value, because that's what produces the wealth. How does it produce the wealth? I mean, obviously, you can't go into a store, take some stuff off the shelf, go to the cash register and say, okay, how much surplus value do I owe? You'll be bounced out on your butter, marched out in handcuffs. You can't do that. Obviously, something has to happen to convert it into wealth. And that's where the commodity. You're now free to inject the commodity. That's where the commodity comes into the picture. A commodity's value in capitalism is a combination, obviously, of its use value and the exchange value, which is based on, is actually the value of the labor used to produce it. That's what a commodity's value is, nothing else. Care must be taken here, because once that value is established and placed in the commodity is bought and sold to produce wealth. This is known as the realization of surplus value or of labor value. the realization of labor value. So far, so good? Or so far, maybe not all that great, because there's a real problem here. Price, which is essential, and Marx wrote it as being essential in the circulation of commodities, is not equal to the amount of labor put into it. You very, very frequently in capitalism have products that are much, much more expensive than the labor costs that were put into it. And you also have products that are a lot less costly, that are underpriced compared to the labor investment that the capitalist makes. In these cases, the product either does not sell well because the price is too high, or the company fails because the price is too low. Price is also a function of competition in capitalism, social conditions in capitalism. It is not rigidly defined by the amount of labor put into it. People criticize Marx talking about bourgeois economics and price and all. That was one of the criticisms that the bourgeois economists make of Marx, that it doesn't explain price. Marx never said that the price of an object is equal, or that the labor value of a commodity is equal to the amount of labor used to produce it. What he said is the only value, the only exchange value it has is its labor value. It can be less than the labor value or more. But it can be a lot less than the labor value. In fact, it can be a failed product. But the reality is that that's the only kind of value it has in. Bourgeois economists really couldn't buy this. They would talk about price and investment and all the rest. And most of all, they didn't understand why the heck Marx was focusing on this whole question of labor value. What people call the labor theory of value. You may have heard that attributed to Marx. Marx never used the term labor theory of value. He rejected that concept, actually, in his work. And that's because great bourgeois economists like Adam Smith, David Ricardo, the great English economist, they all had a labor theory of value. But you see, they said the labor theory of value is useful in certain periods of capitalism. I mean, Smith said it's useful in the first few periods of capitalism, but after that, investment and price fluctuation, all this just makes it not a very useful theory. Ricardo said it's a useful theory, but there are too many exceptions. So you can use it. And Marx said, you guys don't get it. You're attributing to a commodity all of these qualities in the society it doesn't have. The only thing it has is its labor value and its use value. That's the only thing it has. And these are the determinants of price. No one ever said that the product or the commodity has all of the labor value stuck into it. It's just that labor value is the only kind of value in it. You guys are practicing a kind of fetish. Fetish being giving credit or viewing an object as having more power. Power it doesn't really have. A stone, for example, protects you. Or a little doll can bring you health. Those are fetishes. Marx called the thinking of bourgeois economists on commodities the fetishism of commodities. And that's one of the reasons he rejected this labor theory of value term. Called this is a law. It works for all capitalist society, the law of value. Okay, go ahead. Let me explain so. Let me explain why this is important. We can best understand the law of value's importance if we look at later society under capitalism. Capitalism primary drive is to extend and expand that surplus value and to restrain or diminish the recognized labor value, right? Because the surplus value makes the wealth. It does this in a couple of ways. There are many, many ways that it does it. But let's take two. One is the division of labor, in which capitalism reorganizes the working class so that rather than spending your time making one product, you spend all your time doing one small task in collaboration with other workers to finish the product. Great example, this is the assembly line. For example, in the auto industry, where a person would spend 25 years of his or her life doing nothing but riveting one part to another over and over again. I mean, can you imagine what that's like? We're a species that is accustomed to the production of the means of our subsistence, and we're drilling a freaking screw into a chassis for 25 years. But the efficiency that is produced by that is enormous. In doing that, the capitalist gets a much more expanded productive value while keeping the same recognized labor value. Working on this machine, and machines are the second way that capitalism expands its surplus value. It's magical. Machine is different from a tool. Tool is something that the worker has in his or her hand to make their work more efficient. The machine takes the place of the worker. And it does this in a remarkable way. Machines have a labor value and a surplus value. They have. It's the labor value, for example, of the people who mined the raw materials that make the machine, the designers who designed it, the coordinators of four men who organized the work staff to put these things together, and the workers themselves who, through another assembly line, make this huge machine. Truck drivers and delivery people who get the machine there. Maintenance people who keep it going, who set it up. All of these people, their value and their labor value is in this machine. It's complex labor value. It's an accumulated labor value and surplus value. But through the creation of machines, capitalism manages to take all of this labor value, including the recognized value that it has had to compensate. And machines are compensated very well. You gotta buy a machine with a lot of money. You gotta invest a lot of money to buy one of those machines. But once you have it in, it is able to produce the labor value of 100 workers using only 10. It's the same amount of labor value that you would have had to exploit from 100 workers. But you have the recognized labor value of 10. How does this work? Because of the accumulated labor value of the rest of the workers that went in there. As it accumulates and becomes more complex, it makes the capitalist more able to produce a heightened level of labor value while minimizing and controlling, and even in some cases decreasing, or definitely decreasing through unemployment, the recognized value. It's important. I heard you, so I'll explain soon, right now. You gotta understand this. It's what makes revolution. Capitalism, of course, is a constant struggle because you're taking more from workers than they're actually producing. You're denying workers the control of their own labor, etc. It's a terrible system in that regard. But this problem that I've just been talking about, a problem that has consumed the interest of Marxist theoreticians and economists for the latter half of the 20th century at least, and into the 21st century, is the major contradiction of capitalism. Exactly. Why? When you look at these relationships, it's as if this is capitalist heaven. You get the productive labor value equivalent to that work of 100 people, and you only got to pay 10 of them? I mean, how good could it get? It's perfect, except for one thing. Surplus value does not equal wealth. It has to be converted into wealth. It has to be realized. And it's realized through commodities, bought and sold, the circulation of commodities. So as you're employing the working class and freezing its wages, who is going to buy the commodities? This particular problem known contemporaneously as overproduction, the production of too much commodity, much more than the society can actually consume, is the major problem of capitalism. The major problem of capitalism and the major contradiction. It is a problem that brings these classes' struggle into much sharper focus. Because not only does the worker suffer the oppression and exploitation of the daily functioning of capitalism, but now the worker ain't got no job. A lot of workers don't have a job. And the society falls into a kind of social squalor, a immediate daily crisis. All kinds of problems are created by this. Most social problems are created by this. While the capitalist continues to make surplus value, but has more and more of a problem realizing it. So companies go out of business increasingly. Fewer and fewer people are working consistently. It's much war over markets and resources. All of these things that are generated that we consider to be major problems of our society are contributed to by this problem of overproduction. Plus, it's such an irrational way of organizing people's work. It's crazy. Makes no sense. And so in these societies, capitalist societies, these two classes, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, capitalist class and the working class, are in constant moment-to-moment conflict. Capitalist class seeking to expand its surplus value and realize it on the backs of the workers. The workers seeking to expand their wages, to get better working hours, all the rest. What you know as the daily class struggle. And you see it every day of our lives. We see this going on. Some Marxists say that Marx was absolutely certain there would be a revolution as a result of this class struggle. And it didn't happen. And so they question if that means that Karl Marx was full of it and that Marxism no longer works. The favorite criticism of Marxism is, you told us there was going to be a revolution. Where is it? What is the problem? Well, the problem is, first of all, we got to save what I just said, which is our longest section. So I appreciate you paying attention. But the real question, of course, is alienation. We'll get to that in section 4.